Hello, and welcome to 2020 A Car Odyssey. Yeah, I know it's a horrible title, but as I told you in the channel intro, the whole purpose of this channel is to go through the process of picking out and configuring and buying a new car and then all the stuff that goes along with it and following along. But first, you kind of need to know where I'm coming from and what kind of cars I've had in the past. So this first video is called The Early Years with the clickbaity title of My Driver's Ed car was a 1968 Dodge Charger in orange. This is true. So let's get on to it. Oh, well, then the next video will be the later years. By the way, I happen to have a perfect, this will be from my first car through grad school. Then after grad school, I went and worked in New York City for 10 years, so I didn't have a car. So then the next video will pick up after New York City when I moved to California and the cars I've had from then until now. And then the third video will be the process I've been going through and then will continue to go through to pick my next car. So, the early years. Okay. So my first car technically was the 1968 Dodge Charger at my high school. Apparently, I'm not sure this, it was a long time ago. Again, if my driver's ed car was a 1968 Dodge Charger, then I was doing driver's ed in the 1960s. So it was a long time ago. And the story was, I think that the conventional wisdom at the high school was that the owner of the local Dodge dealer's kid was at my high school. So he donated these cars, I think 2 of them, because they were brand new and cool, and he figured it would make his kid a big man on campus. I don't know. That was the rumor. I don't know. But the truth was the Dodge dealer did donate 2 bright orange, like the General Lee, 1968 Dodge Chargers, and that was my driver's ed car. Now, normally you'd say, well, that was the first car because my dad, by the way, did not teach me how to drive because apparently with my sister and my older brothers, apparently it didn't go well and he didn't like the experience, so he let driver's ed train me. But what he didn't know was that I had taught myself to drive in my mom's cars. Sometimes, not often, but occasionally, I would feel a little poorly and not want to go to church on Sunday morning. So the family would bundle up and go off to church, and I would get my mom's keys out of her purse and take her car out for little joyrides on Sunday mornings. There happened to be a half-price books place across the river, across the Bay Bridge. So I drive over this bridge and go down, and they had like old magazines for cheap, like, I don't know, maybe magazines like, I don't know, men's magazines that a young teenage boy might want to buy and hide under his mattress. So anyway, so I would borrow, now, and again, my memories are all hazy, but I'm pretty sure at one point during this time, my mother was driving a Mustang. Now, I don't know how she ended up in a Mustang because she would have been in her 50s. But my oldest brother had a Mustang for a while, and I think my sister had a Mustang. Maybe it was my sister. I don't know. But for a while, it was a Mustang. But so I used to go joyride. I'm amazed I never got pulled up. I mean, I had no license. I was underage. I wasn't even old enough to have a license. I don't know what would have happened, but I got away with it. Oh, well. So anyway, but my first official car I drove was the 68 Dodge Charger. Then my first car, now I didn't own it, my dad owned it, my dad got it for me, was a 1968 Fiat 850 Spider convertible. Now you'd go, why would your dad buy you a car like that? Well, he didn't. My brother had one, my oldest brother, and for some reason he gave it to my dad, payment on, paying off a loan or something, I don't know. But it was a gift to my dad from my oldest brother, and my dad gave it to me to drive. I loved this car. It was the most, I don't know if you've ever seen, well, there's a picture of one right here. I don't know if you've ever seen one, been in one, but basically it was a convertible, and you could put the top up by reaching behind you and flipping it up and snapping the things. Boom, done. So like if it start raining, just done. Or put it down. When you opened the engine compartment, which was in the back, because it was a rear engine, rear wheel drive, so there was no tunnel, which was good because there was no space inside the car. It was tiny. But if you'd open up the back and look down, there was an 850cc engine. It was like a little motorcycle engine sitting in this big empty cavern of an engine bay, which was actually very small, but with an 850 in it, it looked even smaller. It had a 5-gallon gasoline tank. At the time, in the late 60s, Texas still had gas wars and stuff, and so at one point, gas got down to like 18 cents a gallon. So I could go into a gas station, oh, and by the way, and this was full-service gas stations. So I could pull into a gas station, say, fill it up, and it would be like 82 cents. It only held 5 gallons. The most that was going in, let's see, at 18 cents a gallon, if I can do my math, is 80 cents. But it got like 48 miles to the gallon. So, I mean, it was eco car before its time. I was an original eco warrior. Loved that car. Oh, another fun story about that car. Remember I said my brother gave it to my father? So my brother gave it to my father. When my father went to register the car, the lady at the county clerk's office said, well, what did you pay for it? So my dad said, well, let me pull one over on the county here, $400. She said, okay, well then the tax will be blah, 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 blah. She said, $400, too bad they didn't just give it to you, because then you wouldn't have to pay any tax. So my dad, trying to put one over on the county clerk, ended up paying more tax than he actually owed. He actually owed zero tax because it had been a gift. But anyway, loved that car and drove the hell out of it until this kind of gets into my life story a little bit, which you don't really need to hear. Some of you watching this channel know my life story, and so you'll appreciate this. I got kicked out of high school because I refused to get my hair cut. Well, it happened a lot. They'd suspend me, and then I'd go back and maybe trim it up. Or actually, for a while, I wore a short-haired wig. It was a long, involved process. But anyway, one of the early times when I got kicked out and wouldn't cut my hair, my dad said, "You're cutting your hair and going back to school." And I said, "No, it's the principal of the thing." I mean, not the principal of the school. It's the principal with PLE. It's the principal of the thing. They shouldn't be allowed to tell me. And by the way, this was when my hair was like barely touching my ears and barely, I mean, it was shorter than probably anybody's hair, any man's hair who's watching this, except those of you with shaved heads. Well, so my dad said, well, if you're not cutting your hair, I'm selling the car. So he took the Fiat away from me, sold it. Well, I did go back to high school, so I then still needed a car. So wait till you get a load of this one. That's right, my next car was a 1968 Oldsmobile 98. Why was I driving? By the way, mine was gray. By the way, finding pictures of old cars is really hard. Well, finding pictures of old cars that don't have a lot of, that are freely usable online without paying fees is really hard. And this is like the only picture of an Oldsmobile 98 that didn't have a lot of copyright crap on it that could be freely used. Mine was silver. What was I doing with those? Well, again, people who know me personally will know that my dad got swindled by this oil man back in the 60s. And we somehow ended up repoing his cars. So he had like 2 or 3 cars. So we got 2 or 3 of his cars. We went out, me and my dad and I think somebody else, maybe one of my brothers, we went over to this guy's house and stole his cars as repayment of the debt he owed my father. Well, one of them, yeah, you guessed it, Oldsmobile 98. So my dad said, well, you're a teenager. This is a really safe car. Nothing could happen to it. It's like bulletproof. You'll be good. So I drove this car for a while. And by the way, as a teenager, let me tell you, I highly recommend great giant cars like this. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these things. They're like 12 feet long and like 8 feet wide. They were bench seats. You could fit 8 people comfortably in that car. So whenever we had to go anywhere, like to the beach, because by the way, I lived near the coast, so we'd go to the beach a lot, we'd take my car because I could seat 8. So we actually, 4 in the front was a little uncomfortable. 4 in the back wasn't that bad. 4 in the front was, but 6 to 8. Anyway, wonderful car. And by the way, I probably would have driven it off to college when I went off to college, except for the fact that one day my dad was getting ready to go to work and he was backing out of the driveway and he cut his car and forgot that mine would be parked right there, and he just dove into the side of it, caved in the whole side of the car. By the way, hardly did any damage to his car, totaled the Olds. So I lost the Olds. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself a little. Okay, that happened to be right before I had already been kicked out of school permanently, or dropped out technically. And so he didn't replace the car. I didn't have a car. And he sent me off to live with my oldest brother, the one who'd given him the Fiat 850. Well, in New York. So I went off to New York to live with my oldest brother because I didn't have a high school diploma and was a bum. Well, my brother at this point was driving a Fiat 124, which is probably what he bought to replace the Fiat 850. Now, this actually had a real engine, like a real car engine, not a little motorcycle engine. Pretty cool car. I hardly ever got to drive it. But my brother Joe and I would take this car and we would go enter gymkhanas and road rallies with this car together. In the gymkhanas, we'd be like, he'd be 7 and I'd be 77. So we'd have 7/77, taped on the door. And by the way, I never won a gymkhana. And then we'd go to road rallies, as a team. And, and I don't know if you've ever done a road rally. They're tons of fun. They give you these kind of cryptic instructions and a set of maps, and then there's category. You can be seat of the pants, which is what we were, where you're just doing it with pencil and paper, and they have up to equipment. They had road rally computers you could have installed in your car, and so they had all so there were all these different tiers. We were at the lowest level. We just did it for fun, and then what? One day, one weekend, I think it was Westchester County. We went to this road rally, and it was fun. And it extended into dark, which was very rare for these kind of things. And so we're driving around in the dark in upstate New York, and we get completely lost. I mean, completely lost. So at one point we just stop. My brother is driving. I'm the navigator I have the maps. So basically, my fault we're lost. Just saying. So we're lost. And here comes this car tearing by. And I said, as your navigator, I say, follow that car. So my brother pulls out. We follow that car about a mile to a checkpoint. Because road rallies have checkpoints where there's people with, mark off who comes by when. Well, because we had been lost for so long, we hit that checkpoint like to the millisecond when we were supposed to. As a result, we ended up winning the rally. And by the way, we didn't just win our division, the seat of the pants division. We won like 4 different categories. The best time, blah, blah. They didn't give us all of the prizes we won because they didn't think it was fair, because we were getting like half of their prizes were going to us. But we got some good prizes and some trophies. I don't remember what they were, like a car stereo, stuff like that. But anyway, so I had a lot of fun in that 124 Spider convertible. By the way, that's not the car I was driving most of the time, because my brother would take that to work. So I would drive my sister-in-law's car, which was a Volkswagen Squareback. Not nearly as cool. By the way, more on that in just a minute. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering how a high school kid could get dates and stuff driving crappy cars like the Olds 98 well, that's what I looked like back then. So, The girls didn't care about the car as much because I was cute. Anyway, Now I have to have a cool car. We'll talk more about that in a few videos from now. Okay, so I'm living in New York with my brother, so I don't have a car. I'm using their cars. My sister-in-law drags me around to all the colleges in the area, and finally I get into a college without a high school diploma, which is actually quite an achievement, so I hear. But I eventually have to move out of their house and get an apartment close. I have to get an apartment next to the college so that I can walk to my classes, but I can still borrow their car on the weekends and stuff. But then my brother gets promoted after I start college and gets sent to California, and so now I have to have a car because you can't, live without a car. So I go back, I think it was maybe when it was Thanksgiving or Christmas that year, one of the holidays. I flew home, and my dad gave me my mother's 1968 green Dodge Dart to drive back to New York to college. Okay, not a cool car, but was a Dodge, which will come into play later. Remember, my first car, my driver's ed car, was a Dodge, my technical first car. This is a Dodge. There's more Dodges maybe to come. Anyway, this was a good little car. I drove it for a couple of years in college. It did quite well until one night I'm coming home from a party. I've had a few drinks with my girlfriend, and we're on the college campus. So we're not on a real road. And, if you've ever been on little college campus roads, they're usually not really wide enough for two cars, just barely wide enough for two cars to pass. Well, a guy comes around a curve, and he has to be going 50 or 60. The speed limit's like 15. And we hit head on, not head on, but like 50% head on, like the driver's half of his hood hits the driver's half of my hood. Totals both cars. My girlfriend hits the windshield because she wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I was wearing a seatbelt. By the way, there was also an accident earlier in my life when my sister was driving where I wasn't wearing a seatbelt and I got my leg stuck through the seat. And wear a seatbelt. Trust me. You're almost always better off. Anyway, so totaled the Dodge Dart. Well, so now I have no car again. But I'm still living, I have a roommate, I think, at this point, and so I can still get around, but not really. So my dad flies up from Texas to New York and buys me a car. And what kind of car does he buy me, you may ask? Well, not that one. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. My roommate, when I totaled the Dodge, I had a roommate, that was his car. He had a 1969 Saab Sonnett. So I would get to drive that or ride in that primarily, until my dad flew up to buy me a car. By the way, sadly, this car, one day my friend was driving back from New York City up the Taconic Parkway, and he had an engine fire. Well, the Saab Sonnett, if you look at it, you see the way it's shaped? It's shaped like that because it's fiberglass, not metal. Well, the fiberglass melted because of the engine fire into the shape of the engine. It was really amazing. I wish I had a picture. But by the way, back in the 60s and 70s, we didn't always have cameras with us, so we don't have pictures of everything. But anyway, so I did drive a Saab Sonnett. Well, mainly road, but sometimes he'd let me drive. Now, then my dad came up and got me, yes, a Volkswagen Squareback. Because, again, remember my sister-in-law had one. I was used to it. Also, they're bulletproof. I don't know if you've ever had a Volkswagen. Air-cooled engines, which means there's way less that can go wrong. You can do almost all your own work. Because of my sister's Squareback, I was friends with these mechanics who took care of Volkswagens there in town because I'd taken her car there a lot. So with them, and I think we paid $600, which was like the cost of one course at college. So it was a cheap-ass car, but it ran, and it ran, and it ran, and it ran. And it ran some more. Until one day, by the way, I used to do a opera season in the winter. I was a drama major. Hard to believe, right? I seem so undramatic. But we used to do this opera company down in Florida between Christmas and between semesters. And I would drive that down there. Well, Disney World was down there. So we went to Disney World, and I bought a sticker of Mickey Mouse, standing like that, and stuck it on the driver's side door. So that from then on, the car was Mickey. Well, anyway, once we were at this opera company, we were going to grab some dinner at this. They let us have the meal plan at some college, so that we could eat. It was a cheap ass opera company. So, but I just parked in the little circle in front of the cafeteria. We were just going to run in, eat something real quick, and run back out. And a guy walking by said, "Hey, you don't want to park there. You'll probably get hit once or twice." And I looked at him and looked at my friend Steve, the guy with the Saab Sonnett, well, DOA at this point. And I said, "Once or twice? What the F?" Except I didn't say F, but you know what I said. So by the way, this was like 1971. So Tom Cruise and Risky Business, that was years later when they said sometimes you just got to say what the F. I was saying it back then. Anyway. Well, get ahead towards the end of the squarebacks to Mickey's life. Mickey didn't last that much longer. He started getting a little sluggish, and I was having trouble going up hills. So I took him to those mechanics I told you about that I liked, that were really good with Volkswagens. And I dropped it off and had somebody pick me up. And then I went back a few days later to see, what the damage was going to be. And the guy who had not been there when I dropped it off, by the way, he was the other guy. There were like two guys. So the other guy. He said, "You drove that car in here." I said, "Well, yeah. How else was I going to get it here? I wasn't going to pay to have it towed. It was not that good a car." He goes, "Damn, I just lost $50 because I bet him no one could drive that car anywhere." It had a cracked block. It had full compression in one cylinder out of four and partial compression in a second cylinder. And then no compression in two of the four cylinders. And I said, "Well," he said, "there's nothing we can do." I said, "Well, thanks." And I paid him whatever, the fee was for looking at it. Got in it, drove off, and drove it for I think another 3 months. Again, not fast and not uphill very much. And then one day it finally just died. And I pulled over. It was near the college. I pulled over and put it on the side of the road. Took off the license plate because I had Texas plates. Remember, car was registered in Texas because my dad owned it. Right, so it was my dad's car. I was in New York. New York and Texas at this point in time did not have reciprocity, which was a bad thing if you got a speeding ticket because it meant they had to arrest you because they couldn't just give you a ticket and let you go because Texas would not enforce the ticket. But it also meant that if New York called and said, "Hey, this VIN number is registered to somebody in Texas, who is it?" Texas wouldn't tell them. So I just abandoned the car. So Mickey, and by the way, and I saw him like every day, because it was right by school. So I saw him almost every day until one day he was gone. I miss Mickey. He was a good car. But my dad really came through with the next car. That's right. He got me a 1972 Chevy Camaro. Now remember, this is like 74 maybe. So the car, it wasn't new, and by the way, it wasn't white with blue stripes because that's way cool. Again, hard to find royalty-free pictures of 1972 Camaros. In fact, that may not even be a 72. That may be a 73 or I don't know. And mine was brown, and it had the leather roof, the tonneau kind of roof, the faux leather roofs that were big back then. Again, couldn't find a picture of one, but that was the body style. And by the way, my dad bought it at auction from like either Hertz or Avis Rent-A-Cars. It was formerly a rent-a-car. So this car had been treated badly, but I loved it. And I drove this car, until 1977. So I drove it for almost 4.5 years. Love this car. Fantastic car. I cannot tell you how much I love this car. I have so many stories about this car that I won't bore you with. Well, there's one that was, I lived in these, the college built these terrace apartments up on a hill behind the on campus, but up kind of behind where all the buildings were. So you had to walk down this little hill and across anyway. So there was a little windy road that went up to the terrace apartments where you could park. And I had a college buddy with me, Brian was his name. And it was winter, and we hit a spot of ice. And that car, rear wheel drive, let go, spun out, went off the side of the road, down a hill, and came to a stop. I kid you not. There was a tree right outside my door. There was a tree right outside the passenger door. We could not open either door. There was a big tree about an inch behind the rear bumper. And that was when I figured God must really love me, because there is no way that car is going to land in that position. We had to climb out the windows because we couldn't open the doors, and then kind of push the car. And then we went and got some people, and we pushed the car back up on the road and went on our way. But I love that car. Great, great car. Even in gold, which was not a brown. It was really a brownish car. It was a ugly, with the light tan roof. But not pretty, but awesome. Loved that car. Now, again, drove that car all the way through the rest of my college years. And then I went back to Texas and went to grad school. Drove that car all the way through grad school. In fact, I think we had the rear end replaced because it had rusted out. Remember, been driven in New York where they salt the roads. The back end had rusted out. We did some repairs. And when I was in college, people would say, can I borrow your car? And I said, sure, if you can start it. And they'd take the keys and they'd go be gone for a while, and they'd come back and give me the keys and say, never mind. There was something wrong with the starter. It stuck. And my dad had an auto shop as part of his store that he ran. And the head of the auto shop, because I was his boss's kid, would take care of me, and he took care of this car and kept it running way longer than it should have. But anyway, when the starter started doing this, he said, well, we can replace the starter, and that's going to be like hundreds of dollars. And he said, I'm not sure your dad's going to want to pay it, especially when I can just paint a little X on the starter, and then you get like a rubber hammer, and whenever this happens, you climb up under there and tap it right on the X with the rubber hammer, and it'll start right up. And that's how I started the car. Now, you didn't have to do it every time. That's why it was like Russian roulette when people would say, can I borrow your car? And I'd say, if you can start it. At least 50, 60% of the time it would start for them. Sometimes it wouldn't. But I never told anybody else about the hammer and anyway. Love that car. But then I finished grad school, and then I got a job in New York City. And in New York City, I'm not going to own a car. And it was technically, by the way, still my dad owned that car. So I left it with my dad, and he sold my beautiful Chevrolet Camaro as I flew off to New York to start my life as an adult. Although I was, 23? 22. When I was 22 and went off to New York to start my life as an adult. And that's my story. And I'm sticking to it. So, come back for part 2, the adult years, when after I leave New York and move to California, we'll start with the first car I bought in California, and run all the way through to the present. So, come back, and I'll see you in the next one.